The moment I saw Patricia Carmichael standing on my porch at 7 in the morning, holding a clipboard and wearing her signature pearl necklace, I knew my peaceful Thursday was about to go sideways. "William Whitmore, we need to discuss something urgent regarding your snow removal contractor," she announced, not even bothering with a greeting. Her breath formed little clouds in the frigid Connecticut air, and behind her, I could see my perfectly cleared driveway and walkways, still steaming slightly from the fresh removal. I pulled my robe tighter and leaned against the doorframe. "Good morning to you too, Patricia." "What about my snow removal guy?" She adjusted her glasses, which were frosted at the edges, and pursed her lips. "The HOA board held an emergency meeting last night. Several residents have complained that their driveways haven't been cleared promptly after the recent storms. Meanwhile, your property looks immaculate within hours of snowfall. The board has determined that since you reside within the Meadowbrook Estates community, you have an obligation to share your contractor's services with other residents." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You're telling me I have to share my snow removal guy? This is no laughing matter, Mr. Whitmore. Section 12.7 of the HOA bylaws states that residents must maintain harmonious relationships and not create disparities that diminish neighborhood morale. Your pristine driveway while Mrs. Henderson next door is trapped in her home is exactly that kind of disparity. Mrs. Henderson can hire her own snow removal service," I said, my patience already wearing thin. "I'm not stopping anyone from calling contractors." Patricia's face reddened. "Everyone else's contractors are completely booked. Your man seems to be the only available option in the area. The board is demanding you provide his contact information and ensure he services the entire neighborhood on a rotating basis, starting with board members' properties." I rubbed my temples. This was classic Patricia. She'd been president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA for 3 years, and in that time, she'd made it her personal mission to control every aspect of life in our gated community in Greenwich. Last year, she tried to ban my friend from parking his Tesla in my driveway because it wasn't an approved visitor vehicle color. The year before that, she'd sent me 14 violation notices about my mailbox being a 1/4 inch too far from the approved setback. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You want me to give up my private contractor, whom I pay premium rates for priority service, so that you and your board friends can jump to the front of the line? For the good of the community, yes. The board is prepared to make this mandatory if you don't comply voluntarily." "Well, Patricia, here's the thing. My arrangement with Diego isn't just a standard contract, but I'll tell you what, let me talk to him and see what I can work out. Give me 24 hours, she sniffed. "The board expects a response by tomorrow evening's meeting. 7 o'clock sharp. We'll be discussing your compliance then." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back down my perfectly cleared walkway, her boots crunching on the salt Diego had laid down. I closed the door and immediately pulled out my phone. Diego Ramirez had been handling my snow removal for 3 winters now. He was reliable, professional, and ran a small operation with just himself and his teenage son, Miguel. More importantly, he was a genuinely good guy who'd become a friend over the years. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Will. Everything okay with the driveway this morning? Diego, we need to talk. Can you come by this afternoon?" When Diego arrived at 3 o'clock, I had coffee waiting in my home office. He looked concerned as he settled into one of the leather chairs across from my desk. Miguel waited in their truck outside. "What's going on?" Diego asked. "You sounded stressed on the phone." I explained the morning's visit from Patricia and the HOA's demands. Diego's expression darkened as I spoke. "Let me guess," he said when I finished. She wants me to drop my other clients and service just this neighborhood, basically. And she wants you to prioritize the board members. Diego shook his head. Will, I appreciate your business, but I can't do that. I've got 20 other clients across Greenwich and Stamford. Some of them I've been working with for 10 years. I can't just abandon them because your HOA president wants special treatment. I know, and I wouldn't ask you to, but here's what I'm thinking, and hear me out before you say no. I leaned forward. How would you feel about coming to work for me full-time? Diego blinked. What? I'm serious. You know I've got the estate, right? Not just this house in Meadowbrook, but the 12-acre property I bought last year in Ridgefield. Diego nodded slowly. He'd done some work there, clearing the long driveway and the paths around the main house. I've been planning to hire a full-time property manager anyway. Someone to handle landscaping, snow removal, general maintenance, all of it. The Ridgefield place alone is a full-time job, especially in winter. I'd pay you a salary, full benefits, and you'd still have your evenings and weekends mostly free. Miguel could work part-time during summers and school breaks if he wants. Will, I don't know. My business would go to someone you trust. You could sell the client list and equipment to another contractor, or keep a few select clients if you want, handle them on weekends. But your primary job would be managing my properties, plural, because I'm actually closing on another place next month in New Canaan. Diego sat back, processing. What kind of salary are we talking about? I named a figure that made his eyes widen. It was generous, but not outrageous for what I was asking. With the amount of property I owned, I needed someone reliable, and Diego had proven himself over and over. That's more than I clear in a good year, Diego admitted, even with all my clients. And you'd have health insurance, retirement matching, paid time off. No more worrying about equipment breaking down and eating your profits. No more working 18-hour days during storm season. It's steady, secure, and honestly, I could use someone I trust. Diego was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. Can I talk it over with my wife? This is a big decision. Of course. Take a few days. But Diego, there's one more thing. If you do take this job, you wouldn't be available to service the HOA properties anymore. You'd be working exclusively for me. A slow smile spread across Diego's face. That would really tick off that HOA lady, wouldn't it? It would make Patricia absolutely furious, which isn't my primary motivation, but I won't lie and say it isn't a nice bonus. We both laughed, and Diego promised to call me by the weekend with his decision. The next evening, I showed up to the HOA board meeting at Patricia's house, which she'd converted into a makeshift command center for neighborhood governance. 6 other board members sat around her dining room table, including Vice President Karen Blakely, Treasurer Martin Thompson, and Secretary Jennifer Trent. Patricia called the meeting to order with an aggressive bang of her gavel. Item 7 on tonight's agenda, the matter of Mr. Whitmore's snow removal contractor. Mr. Whitmore, have you obtained the contact information and scheduling commitments as requested? I remained standing near the doorway. I have an update, yes. I spoke with Diego Ramirez at length yesterday. Excellent. And when can he begin servicing board members' properties? He can't. Diego won't be available for any Meadowbrook Estates residents effective immediately. The room erupted. Patricia's face went from pale to crimson in seconds. Excuse me. I hired Diego as my full-time estate manager. He'll be working exclusively on my properties from now on. Karen Blakely jumped to her feet. You can't do that. You did this deliberately to spite the HOA. I did this because I needed an estate manager, and Diego was the perfect candidate. The timing with your demands is coincidental. Coincidental. Patricia's voice had reached a pitch that probably bothered dogs in the next town over. "You're sabotaging the entire community. This is a clear violation of HOA regulations." I pulled out my phone and opened a document. Actually, I had my attorney review the bylaws this afternoon. There's nothing in Section 12.7 or any other section that requires residents to share private contractors. There's nothing that prevents residents from hiring contractors for full-time private employment. And there's definitely nothing that gives the board authority to commandeer private business relationships. Martin Thompson, who was an accountant by trade and generally the most reasonable board member, cleared his throat. "He's right, Patricia. I reviewed the bylaws myself when you brought this up. We don't have authority here." Patricia whirled on him. "Whose side are you on?" "I'm on the side of actually following our governing documents," Martin replied coolly. "Then we'll amend the bylaws," Patricia snapped. "Emergency powers provision. We can implement temporary rules for community welfare." "That requires a vote of the entire membership," Jennifer Trent pointed out, "and it takes 30 days' notice." Patricia's jaw clenched. "Fine. Then we'll assess Mr. Whitmore with fines for creating community discord. $500 per day until he resolves this situation." "Good luck enforcing that," I said. "My attorney is very familiar with HOA overreach cases." "I'm sure a judge would love to hear how you're fining me for legal employment decisions that have nothing to do with property maintenance or appearance." I left before Patricia could sputter out a response. As I walked to my car, I could hear raised voices from inside the house. Martin seemed to be arguing with Patricia about legal liability. This was going to be entertaining. Diego called me Saturday morning with his answer. "My wife and I talked it through. We want to do this. When do I start? How about Monday?" "That gives you the weekend to start transitioning your other clients." "I've already got a guy interested in buying my equipment and client list. Jorge has been subcontracting for me during busy times. He's good, reliable. I can sell him everything and know my old clients will be taken care of." "Perfect. Come by Monday morning and we'll do all the paperwork. Welcome aboard, Diego." "Thanks, Will. This is life-changing for my family, I mean it." After we hung up, I felt genuinely good about the decision, HOA drama aside. Diego deserved stability and security, and I got someone trustworthy managing properties worth millions of dollars. The following Tuesday brought another storm, this one dumping 8 inches on Connecticut overnight. I woke up to find Diego already at work, his truck in my driveway, the plow blade scraping against the concrete. By 8 o'clock, my driveway and walkways were immaculate. By 9 o'clock, Patricia was at my door again. "I see your employee is taking care of your property," she said icily, "while the rest of the neighborhood suffers." I looked past her. Sure enough, several driveways on the street remained snow-covered, including Patricia's. "Have you tried calling other snow removal companies? They're all booked solid or charging emergency rates. This is your fault." "No, Patricia, this is the result of poor planning. Everyone knows to book snow removal services before winter, not after the first big storm. We had services, but they are unreliable. Your man was the only dependable one and you've monopolized him. I've employed him. That's how jobs work." Patricia thrust a piece of paper at me. "This is an official notice of fine. $500 per day starting last Friday for violation of community harmony standards. That's $2,000 so far. You can pay by check or money order." I took the paper and read it carefully. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with the board's signatures. "I'll have my attorney review this." "Your attorney can't change the bylaws." "No, but he can sue for harassment and overreach. Talk to you soon, Patricia." I closed the door and immediately called my attorney, Richard Crawford. I'd used Richard for various real estate transactions over the years, and he'd handled a few HOA disputes for other clients. "Will, good to hear from you. How's the snow removal drama?" I filled him in on the fine notice. Richard sighed heavily. "Yeah, this won't hold up. They're abusing their authority. The Community Harmony Clause is meant to address things like noise complaints or property appearance issues, not private employment decisions. I'll draft a response and send it to the board. Fair warning, though, this might escalate. Let it. I'm not paying a $2,000 fine for hiring an employee." "Understood. I'll also include a warning that continued harassment could result in a countersuit. That usually cools down overzealous board members." 2 days later, Diego called me from the Ridgefield property where he was managing snow removal on the long, winding driveway. "Hey, Will, something weird happened. A woman showed up here asking for me. Let me guess. Patricia, how'd you know? She offered me $5,000 to quit working for you and start servicing the HOA neighborhood. I actually had to pull over on my way to a meeting." "She what?" "Yeah, she showed up in a black Mercedes, very official looking. Said the HOA authorized her to offer me a contract for exclusive services to Meadowbrook Estates. $5,000 upfront, plus seasonal rates." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'm your employee now, not an independent contractor, and I'm not interested." She got really angry. Started saying you were controlling me and that I had a duty to the community. I told her I don't even live in your community and asked her to leave. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this, Diego." "Don't be. It was actually kind of funny." She looked like she was going to explode when I turned her down. "But Will, is this going to be a problem? I don't want drama affecting my job." "It won't. This is all on Patricia. Just let me know if she contacts you again and don't engage with her." "You got it, boss." The situation escalated further when I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Dennis Morton from a firm in Stamford. The letter demanded immediate payment of the accumulating fines, now totaling $3,500, and threatened to place a lien on my property if I didn't comply within 10 days. Richard laughed when I forwarded him the letter. "Dennis Morton. I've dealt with him before. He takes HOA cases because they're easy money, but he folds as soon as there's real resistance. Let me respond." What I didn't know was that Patricia had apparently gone completely off the rails behind the scenes. I found out later from Martin Thompson, who started having serious doubts about Patricia's leadership. Martin called me unexpectedly on a Friday evening. "Will, this is Martin from the HOA board. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Sure, what's going on?" "I'm calling in my personal capacity, not as a board member. I think you should know that Patricia has been acting increasingly erratic about this snow removal situation. She's been calling emergency board meetings almost daily. She's talking about assessing special fees against your property. Yesterday, she suggested we should hire someone to park cars on your street to block your employee from accessing your driveway. That's insane and probably illegal." That's what I told her. "Jennifer and I have been pushing back, but Patricia has Karen and the other members convinced you're some kind of neighborhood villain. I'm worried she's going to do something that gets the HOA in serious legal trouble." "I appreciate the warning, Martin. For what it's worth, I have no beef with the HOA in general, just with Patricia's overreach. I know. I've been on this board for 5 years and Patricia used to be reasonable, but something changed this year. She's become obsessed with control. The snow removal thing just triggered something in her. Keep me posted if things get worse." "I will, and will. I'm probably going to resign from the board soon. This isn't what I signed up for." Things got worse the following Wednesday. Diego called me, his voice tight with anger. "Will, someone slashed my tires, all 4 of them, at your Ridgefield property." "What? When?" "Must have been last night. I left the truck here overnight because I was working late and my wife picked me up. Came back this morning and found them slashed. There's also spray paint on the driver's door, says community trader. Did you call the police?" "Just got off the phone with them. They're sending someone out, but Will, this is getting scary. I've got Miguel to think about." "I know. I'm calling my attorney right now." "And Diego, I want you to take the rest of the week off, paid. Let's let this cool down. I don't want to abandon the job." "You're not. This is for your safety, please." After Diego reluctantly agreed, I called Richard. His tone shifted from casual to serious as I described the vandalism. "Will, this is criminal activity. The police need to investigate, but you also need to document everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every threatening letter, every fine notice. We may need to pursue a restraining order." "You think Patricia did this?" "I think the timing is suspicious. Someone who knows about your employment of Diego and the HOA situation targeted his truck with specific messaging. That's not random vandalism." The Ridgefield Police Department sent Detective Sarah Morrison to handle the case. She interviewed Diego and me separately, examined the truck, and took photos of the spray-painted message. When she interviewed me, she asked about any ongoing disputes. I explained the entire HOA situation. Detective Morrison took detailed notes. "Have you received any direct threats from this Patricia Carmichael?" "Not physical threats, no. Just harassment and bogus fines." "What about other HOA members?" "Not that I know of. One board member, Martin Thompson, actually warned me that Patricia was becoming erratic." "I'll need his contact information. We'll want to interview him." Over the next few days, Detective Morrison apparently conducted a thorough investigation. She interviewed Patricia, who claimed she was home all evening the night of the vandalism and knew nothing about it. She interviewed other board members. She pulled security footage from a gas station near the Ridgefield property that showed a black Mercedes, similar to Patricia's, driving past around the time of the incident. On Monday, Detective Morrison called me. "Mr. Whitmore, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've identified a person of interest, but we don't have enough evidence yet for an arrest. The security footage is inconclusive. However, we did discover something interesting." "What's that?" "Patricia Carmichael filed a complaint against you last week with the Greenwich Police, claiming you were harassing her and making threats. The responding officer found no evidence to support her claims and filed it as unfounded. But it suggests she may be escalating a personal vendetta." "So what happens now?" "We continue investigating. I've advised Mrs. Carmichael that any further contact with you or your employee could be considered harassment. I've also recommended you consider filing for a restraining order if the behavior continues. I'll talk to my attorney about that." That same afternoon, I got a text from Martin Thompson. "Check the neighborhood Facebook page now." I opened Facebook and navigated to the private Meadowbrook Estates community group. Patricia had posted a long, rambling message about me, calling me a selfish elitist who was destroying community values and hoarding resources while neighbors suffer. She'd included photos of my house, my driveway, and even a photo of Diego's truck from before the vandalism. The comments section was a war zone. Some residents supported Patricia, complaining about difficulty finding snow removal services. Others called her out for harassment and pointed out that I had every right to hire private employees. Jennifer Trent had posted, "This is inappropriate and potentially libelous. Patricia, take this down immediately." Patricia had responded, "I will not be silenced. The community has a right to know. I screenshotted everything and sent it to Richard. His response came within minutes. This is gold for our case. She's publicly harassing you and potentially defaming you. I'm drafting a cease and desist letter tonight. The cease and desist letter arrived at Patricia's house via certified mail on Wednesday. Richard had been thorough, documenting every instance of harassment, the bogus fines, the attempted bribery of Diego, and the social media posts. The letter demanded Patricia stop all contact with me and Diego, retract her social media posts and public statements, and rescind all fines. It warned that failure to comply would result in immediate legal action, including defamation claims and a restraining order petition. Patricia responded by doubling down. She posted the cease and desist letter to the neighborhood Facebook page, along with a new rant about how I was using expensive lawyers to bully the HOA and threatening legal action against volunteers trying to serve their community. She announced an emergency HOA meeting for that Saturday to discuss taking collective action against hostile residents. Richard saw the post and made a decision. We're filing for a restraining order tomorrow. This woman is unhinged. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday in Stamford Superior Court. Richard subpoenaed Detective Morrison to testify about the vandalism investigation and the pattern of harassment. He also subpoenaed Martin Thompson and Jennifer Trent, who had both resigned from the HOA board by this point, disgusted with Patricia's behavior. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in a conservative suit. Patricia showed up with Dennis Morton, her HOA attorney, and Karen Blakely for moral support. Patricia looked defiant, chin raised, clutching a thick folder of papers. The hearing was before Judge Robert Hamilton, a no-nonsense jurist in his 60s who'd been on the bench for 20 years. Richard presented our case methodically, walking through the timeline of harassment, the escalating behavior, and the vandalism incident. Detective Morrison testified about her investigation. Based on the evidence, I believe Mrs. Carmichael has been engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment against Mr. Whitmore. While we couldn't prove she personally committed the vandalism, the timing and nature of the incident align with her stated antagonism toward Mr. Whitmore and his employee. Martin Thompson testified about Patricia's increasingly erratic behavior at board meetings. She became obsessed with controlling this situation. When Mr. Whitmore wouldn't comply with her demands, she took it personally. I heard her say multiple times that she would make him pay and force him to cooperate. Jennifer Trent corroborated Martin's testimony and added details about Patricia's unauthorized attempt to bribe Diego. She used HOA funds, $5,000, without board approval. When the treasurer questioned it, she claimed it was an emergency community expenditure. That's when I resigned. She was out of control. When it was Patricia's turn, Dennis Morton tried to paint her as a dedicated community servant being attacked by a wealthy resident who didn't want to be a good neighbor. But under questioning from Richard, Patricia's composure cracked. Mrs. Carmichael, did you post photos of Mr. Whitmore's home and employee to a public Facebook group? Richard asked. The community had a right to know what was happening. Did you attempt to pay Mr. Ramirez $5,000 to quit his job with Mr. Whitmore? I was trying to solve a community problem without board authorization. I have discretionary authority for community welfare. Did you file a false police report claiming Mr. Whitmore threatened you? Patricia's face reddened. It wasn't false. He was intimidating me with his lawyer. Retaining legal counsel is intimidation. He was using his wealth to bully the HOA, Judge Hamilton cut in. Mrs. Carmichael, you need to answer the questions directly. Did Mr. Whitmore ever threaten you personally? Patricia hesitated. Not in so many words, but his actions. Yes or no, Mrs. Carmichael? No, but that's sufficient. Judge Hamilton reviewed his notes. I've heard enough. Mrs. Carmichael, your behavior as described in this testimony and documented in these exhibits is clearly harassment. Whether you believe your actions were justified by community service is irrelevant. You've exceeded your authority as HOA president, misused HOA funds, and engaged in a sustained campaign against Mr. Whitmore for making a legal employment decision. He signed the restraining order. Mrs. Carmichael, you are to have no contact with Mr. Whitmore or any member of his household, including employees. You are not to post about him on social media. You are not to approach his property. Violation of this order will result in your arrest. The restraining order is effective for 1 year, at which point Mr. Whitmore may petition for an extension. Patricia's mouth fell open. But I live in the same neighborhood. I'm the HOA president. Then I suggest you conduct HOA business through other board members. If you find that impossible, perhaps you should resign your position. This is outrageous. He's the one causing problems. Judge Hamilton's expression hardened. Mrs. Carmichael, I strongly suggest you stop talking. You're very close to being found in contempt. Dennis Morton put a hand on Patricia's arm and she finally fell silent, though she looked ready to explode. As we left the courthouse, Richard was satisfied. That went better than expected. Hamilton didn't hold back. What happens to the HOA fines? I'll send a letter to the board, now that Patricia isn't a factor, demanding they rescind the fines. If they don't, we sue. But my guess is the remaining board members will be reasonable. They know Patricia went rogue. Richard was right. 2 days later, I received a letter from an interim board president, a guy named David Chen who lived 3 streets over. The letter apologized for Patricia's behavior, rescinded all fines, and assured me the board would be conducting a full review of its procedures to prevent similar abuses in the future. They were also conducting a financial audit to account for the unauthorized payment to Diego. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, on a snowy Thursday morning, Diego called me from my Ridgefield property. Will, the police are here. Detective Morrison wants to talk to you. I drove out to Ridgefield immediately. Detective Morrison was waiting with another officer and Diego, who looked shaken. Mr. Whitmore, thank you for coming. We've had a development in the vandalism case. Did you arrest someone? Not yet, but we will shortly. We obtained a warrant for Patricia Carmichael's cell phone records and credit card statements. The cell records place her phone in this area at the time of the vandalism. The credit card records show she purchased spray paint at a hardware store in Ridgefield 2 hours before the incident. So it was her. It was definitely her. We're obtaining an arrest warrant now. I wanted to give you and Mr. Ramirez a heads up because she'll likely blame you for her arrest. Will she go to jail? She'll be arrested and arraigned. Given the nature of the crime and the restraining order violation, she approached your property when she committed the vandalism. The prosecutor will probably push for bail conditions. Whether she serves time depends on how she pleads and what the judge decides. Diego looked at me. I can't believe she actually did this, over snow removal. Some people can't handle not getting their way, Detective Morrison said. I've seen worse disputes over less. Patricia was arrested the following morning at her home. News spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with shocked reactions. Some residents defended Patricia, claiming she'd been driven to extreme actions by my selfishness. Most, however, were horrified that their HOA president had committed a crime. Karen Blakely posted a long defense of Patricia, calling the arrest a witch hunt and blaming me for provoking Patricia. Jennifer Trent shut that down fast. Karen, Patricia committed vandalism and violated a restraining order. Those are crimes. Stop defending the indefensible. The local newspaper, the Greenwich Time, picked up the story. HOA president arrested in snow removal dispute ran as a front-page story in the local section. The article detailed the bizarre escalation from HOA demands to criminal vandalism. I declined to comment when a reporter called, but Diego gave a brief statement about how frightening it had been to find his truck vandalized. Patricia's arraignment was set for the following Monday. Richard advised me to attend with Diego as victims in the case. We sat in the courtroom as Patricia, dressed conservatively and looking significantly less defiant than at the restraining order hearing, stood before Judge Lisa Chen. The prosecutor, Assistant State's Attorney Michael Bradford, outlined the charges: criminal mischief in the third degree and violation of a protective order. He requested bail of $10,000 and conditions including GPS monitoring and no contact with the victims. Dennis Morton, still representing Patricia though he looked deeply uncomfortable, argued for release on promise to appear. Your Honor, Mrs. Carmichael has no criminal record. She's a long-time resident with deep community ties. She's not a flight risk. Judge Chen wasn't buying it. Mr. Morton, your client committed a crime while under a restraining order. That demonstrates a willful disregard for court authority. Bail is set at $10,000. Mrs. Carmichael will wear a GPS monitor and have absolutely no contact with the victims or their properties. Preliminary hearing is set for 3 weeks from today. Patricia's husband, a quiet man named Gerald who had seen maybe twice in 3 years, paid the bail. Patricia walked out of the courthouse without looking at Diego or me. Over the next few weeks, the HOA underwent significant changes. Patricia resigned as president under pressure from residents threatening to recall her. David Chen officially became president. The board implemented new oversight procedures requiring multiple approvals for expenditures and prohibiting individual board members from taking unilateral action. David reached out to me personally. Will, I want to apologize on behalf of the HOA for everything that happened. Patricia's behavior was unacceptable. We're committed to ensuring nothing like this happens again. I appreciate that, David. I have no problem with the HOA when it functions properly. This was all Patricia. We're also dropping any suggestion that residents have to share private contractors. That was absurd from the start, and we're implementing term limits for board positions so no one person can dominate for too long. That sounds like good governance. By the way, several residents have asked me to pass along that they support you. The Facebook drama made it seem like the whole neighborhood was against you, but that was mostly Karen and Patricia's friends. Most people thought the whole thing was ridiculous. That was good to know. I'd been considering selling my Meadowbrook property to avoid the drama, but maybe that wasn't necessary. Patricia's case moved through the system over the next 2 months. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to criminal mischief, and the protective order violation charge was dropped as part of the agreement. Her sentence was 1-year probation, community service, restitution to Diego for the damaged tires and paint job, and mandatory anger management counseling. At the sentencing hearing, Patricia gave a brief statement. I allowed my commitment to the community to override my judgment. I sincerely apologize to Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Ramirez for my actions. I take full responsibility. It sounded coached by Dennis Morton, but I didn't particularly care. She was being held accountable. Judge Chen accepted the plea. Mrs. Carmichael, let me be clear. You're receiving probation because you have no prior record and because you've accepted responsibility. But your behavior was egregious. You used your position of authority in your community to harass someone for making a legal business decision. Then, when that didn't work, you committed a crime. That's unacceptable. If you violate probation in any way, you will serve jail time. You understand? Yes, Your Honor. You're also prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position for the duration of your probation. I'm making that a condition of your sentence. Patricia's face tightened, but she nodded. Life gradually returned to normal. Diego thrived in his new role as my estate manager. He hired 2 part-time assistants to help with the Ridgefield property and the new Cannon house I'd purchased. Miguel started working summers, saving money for college. Diego told me multiple times that the job had been life-changing for his family. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA functioned smoothly under David Chen's leadership. They actually became more responsive and less authoritarian. Property values in the neighborhood increased, partly because word spread that the crazy HOA president was gone. I ran into Patricia exactly once, about 6 months after her sentencing. It was at a grocery store in Greenwich. We made eye contact across the produce section. She looked away quickly and left the store. The restraining order had expired by then, but she clearly wanted nothing to do with me. Karen Blakely remained bitter and occasionally posted passive-aggressive comments on the neighborhood Facebook page about certain residents who think they are above community cooperation. Most people ignored her. By the following winter, Diego had the snow removal routine down to a science across all my properties. He'd invested in better equipment with the budget I'd given him and had trained his assistants well. My driveways and walkways were always immaculate within hours of any snowfall. One morning after a particularly heavy storm, I was having coffee in my kitchen when I saw a car pull up outside. For a brief moment, I tensed, wondering if Patricia was violating her probation. But it was Martin Thompson. He knocked on my door and I invited him in. "Martin, good to see you. How have you been?" "Good, good. I actually just moved out of Meadowbrook, bought a place in Darien. Wanted to say goodbye before I finished packing." "Sorry to see you go. You were one of the reasonable ones on that board," Martin laughed. The Patricia situation killed my appetite for HOA service. I'm happily living somewhere with minimal community governance now, but I wanted to thank you. "Thank me? For what?" "For standing up to Patricia. If you'd rolled over, she would have just gotten worse. Who knows what other crazy demands she would have made. You forcing the issue, getting attorneys involved, it exposed how out of control she'd become. The neighborhood is better off now. I appreciate that. Honestly, I was just defending my right to hire who I want." "Which is exactly what you should have done. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. And if you ever need a reference or anything, let me know." We shook hands and Martin left. Standing there in my doorway, watching Diego methodically clear snow from my walkway, I reflected on how a simple employment decision had spiraled into months of legal drama and actual criminal charges. The whole situation had been absurd from the start. Patricia's demands had no legal basis, no common-sense justification. She'd simply decided that because she was HOA president, she could control aspects of my private life. When I'd refused to comply, she'd escalated in increasingly unhinged ways until she'd literally committed crimes. But the outcome was positive in many ways. Diego had a stable, well-paying job. The HOA had reformed its governance. The neighborhood was more peaceful, and I'd learned valuable lessons about standing firm against unreasonable demands, even when it meant conflict. Diego finished the walkway and waved at me. I waved back, then went inside to pour another cup of coffee. Outside, fresh snow continued to fall, blanketing the neighborhood in white. But my driveway remained clear, thanks to my full-time estate manager, who I'd hired specifically to avoid the kind of community entitlement that Patricia had embodied. Sometimes the best response to unreasonable demands is simply to make them impossible to fulfill. Patricia had wanted me to share Diego's services. Instead, I'd ensured he was exclusively unavailable to her and the entire HOA. It wasn't spite, though. I won't pretend that wasn't satisfying. It was sound business sense and appropriate boundaries. The following spring brought new HOA elections. David Chen ran unopposed for president and won easily. Karen Blakely lost her board position to a newcomer who campaigned on rational governance and respect for residents' privacy. The shift in neighborhood culture was palpable. Diego and I were having lunch at a diner in Ridgefield one afternoon, discussing summer landscaping plans for the properties, when he brought up the Patricia situation unprompted. "You know, I've thought a lot about everything that happened last winter," Diego said. "At first, I was angry. Who vandalizes someone's truck over snow removal? But now, I'm almost grateful. Grateful. If Patricia hadn't gone crazy, I might still be struggling with my contractor business, worrying about equipment breaking down, working 80-hour weeks during winter. Her insanity led to the best job I've ever had. Funny how things work out. That's a healthy perspective, though I'd still rather it had happened without the vandalism." "Oh, for sure. But my point is, sometimes what seems like the worst situation pushes you toward the best outcome. If she'd been reasonable, or if you'd given in, neither of us would be where we are now." He was right. If I'd caved to Patricia's initial demands and shared Diego's contact information, he'd have been overwhelmed with HOA clients, probably provided poor service trying to handle too many properties, and the neighborhood would still have been unhappy. Instead, by hiring him full-time, I'd removed him from the equation entirely, forced the HOA to find their own solutions, and given Diego a better career. The new Cannon property required significant work that summer. The previous owners had let the landscaping deteriorate. Diego threw himself into rehabilitating the gardens and grounds. He hired a landscape designer, supervised a team of contractors, and transformed the property into something stunning. "You've got a real eye for this," I told him one afternoon as we surveyed the completed work. "Ever think about studying landscape architecture formally?" Diego shrugged. "I've learned by doing for 20 years. Maybe someday I'll take some classes. For now, I'm happy with what I've built here." What he'd built was impressive. Across my 3 properties, Diego had implemented efficient systems for maintenance, seasonal care, and emergency response. He'd negotiated deals with suppliers for bulk materials. He'd built a small team of reliable part-time workers. In less than a year, he'd created something that would have taken most property managers several years to develop. By the following winter, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA had completely moved on from the Patricia incident. New residents who moved in didn't even know the story. The neighborhood Facebook group focused on normal things like trash pickup schedules and recommendations for electricians. I ran into Jennifer Trent at a holiday party in Greenwich. She'd moved up to vice president on the HOA board under David Chen's administration. "How's the board treating you?" I asked. "So much better. David actually listens to input. We make decisions collectively. It's like night and day from Patricia's dictatorship." "Glad to hear it. Any regrets about resigning during the drama?" "None. It was the right move, but I'm happy to serve now that things are functional." By the way, we've gotten compliments from people touring the neighborhood. "Your properties always look immaculate. Your estate manager does excellent work. I'll pass that along to Diego. He takes pride in it, as he should. You made a smart hire." 2 years after the initial incident, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia, handwritten on plain stationery. "Dear Mr. Whitmore," it began, "I'm writing to offer a sincere apology for my behavior during the snow removal dispute. I've spent the past 2 years in therapy, working through the issues that led to my actions. I've come to understand that I had an unhealthy need for control, and that I allowed my role as HOA president to inflate my sense of authority over other people's lives. What I did to you and Mr. Ramirez was wrong, full stop. There's no justification. You had every right to hire him and every right to defend yourself against my harassment. I'm ashamed of how I behaved and the stress I caused. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm simply trying to make amends as part of my recovery process. I hope you and Mr. Ramirez are doing well. Sincerely, Patricia Carmichael." I showed the letter to Richard, who'd remained my attorney for various matters. "What do you think? Seems genuine." The tone is very different from her court statement. Sounds like therapy actually helped. Should I respond? That's up to you. You're not obligated to. I thought about it for a few days. Eventually, I wrote a brief response. "Patricia, thank you for your letter. I appreciate the apology and hope you're doing better. We've all moved on. I wish you well. Will Whitmore." Short, cordial, not inviting further contact but acknowledging her effort. It felt right. Diego's response when I told him about the letter was simpler. Good for her for getting help. I don't think about her much anymore. By the third winter, Diego had been my estate manager for over 2 years. His son Miguel was in college, partly funded by money Diego had saved from his stable salary. Diego and his wife had bought a house in a better neighborhood. Life was good. One morning, Diego came to me with a proposal. "Will, I've been thinking. You've got 3 major properties now, and you mentioned possibly buying more. What if we expanded the operation?" "What do you mean?" "Hire a few full-time people, not just part-timers. Create a real estate management team. We could even take on a couple of outside clients, wealthy people with multiple properties like you have. Not an HOA," he added with a grin, "but individuals who need comprehensive property management." I considered it. "You want to build a business? With your backing, yeah. You'd own it, I'd run it. We'd operate at a higher level than typical landscaping or maintenance companies. Real white-glove estate management. Let me think about it and run the numbers, but I like the idea." Over the next few months, we developed a business plan. We incorporated as Whitmore Estate Services, with me as owner and Diego as managing director. We hired 3 full-time employees and took on 4 outside clients, all wealthy individuals with multiple properties in Fairfield County. The business grew steadily. Diego proved to be an excellent manager, maintaining the high standards I required while building client relationships. Within a year, we were profitable and had a waiting list of potential clients. One afternoon, I was meeting with a potential new client at his home in Westport when he mentioned he lived in an HOA community. My antenna went up. "Is the HOA reasonable?" I asked. He laughed. "Why do you have HOA horror stories? You could say that." I gave him the abbreviated version of the Patricia saga. He was amazed. "That's insane. Our HOA is pretty hands-off. They handle common area maintenance and that's about it. I can't imagine them trying to control who I hire. That's how it should work." But you get the occasional power-hungry board member who takes things too far. After signing the Westport client, I reflected on how far everything had come from that morning when Patricia first showed up on my porch demanding I share my snow removal guy. Her unreasonable demand had led to a restraining order, criminal charges, and ultimately a complete restructuring of the Meadowbrook HOA. But it had also led to Diego's career transformation and the creation of a successful business. I still lived in Meadowbrook Estates, though I spent more time at the Ridgefield property. The neighborhood remained peaceful under David Chen's HOA leadership. Property values had increased 15% since Patricia's departure, partly due to the neighborhood's improved reputation. Diego and his team maintained my properties flawlessly. Every season brought new projects and challenges, but the system we'd built handled everything smoothly. The business expanded to 12 full-time employees and 15 high-end clients. 5 years after the initial incident, I attended a community event at Meadowbrook Estates, a summer barbecue organized by the HOA. David Chen had made these events actually enjoyable rather than Patricia's mandatory, community-building exercises that everyone had dreaded. I was talking to a new neighbor, a tech executive who'd moved in 6 months earlier, when he mentioned he was impressed by how well-maintained my property always looked. "Thanks, I've got a great estate management team. I tried to hire them," he admitted. "But they said they're not taking new clients right now. Waiting list is over a year." I couldn't help but smile. Diego had built something special. What had started as a personal employment decision to escape HOA overreach had evolved into a thriving business that was now turning away clients. Later that evening, I stopped by Diego's house to drop off some documents. He was in his backyard grilling dinner with his wife and Miguel, who was home from college for the summer. "Hey, boss," Diego called out. "Want a burger?" "I'm good, thanks. Just wanted to drop these off." Miguel came over, looking more mature than the teenager who used to ride along in his dad's plow truck. "Mr. Whitmore, I wanted to thank you. Dad told me the whole story about how this job happened. If that crazy HOA lady hadn't pushed you, Dad might still be working himself to death as a contractor. This job changed our family's life." "Your dad's hard work changed your family's life," I corrected. "I just provided the opportunity." "Still, we're grateful." After leaving Diego's house, I drove back to Ridgefield, where my estate manager on duty, one of Diego's trained staff, had the property gleaming in the evening light. Security lights illuminated the perfectly maintained grounds. The long driveway was spotless. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering how she was doing. I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and Gerald had moved to Florida, seeking a fresh start away from the embarrassment of her arrest and conviction. I hoped therapy had genuinely helped her, and that she'd found some peace. The whole situation had been a powerful reminder that standing up to unreasonable demands, even when it meant conflict and legal battles, was worth it. If I'd capitulated to Patricia's initial demands, I'd have reinforced her sense of entitlement and authority. By refusing and following through with legal action, I'd not only protected my own rights but probably prevented Patricia from victimizing other residents. The HOA, now properly run by David and his balanced board, served its legitimate function without overreach. Residents seemed happier. Community engagement was higher because people weren't afraid of capricious fines or demands from power-hungry board members. And Diego, the unwitting catalyst for the entire drama, had built a career and business that provided security for his family and quality services for clients across Fairfield County. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones you didn't ask for, but refused to surrender. Patricia had tried to force compliance through intimidation, escalating fines, and eventually criminal vandalism. She'd assumed that her position as HOA president gave her authority over my private decisions. She'd been completely, utterly wrong. The snow removal dispute that started everything was almost funny in retrospect. Such a mundane issue, snow removal, had escalated into restraining orders and criminal charges. But it was never really about snow removal. It was about boundaries, authority, and respect. Patricia had crossed boundaries she had no right to cross. She'd claimed authority she didn't possess. She'd shown zero respect for my autonomy and rights. The only appropriate response was firm, uncompromising resistance backed by legal action. 6 years after that first morning when Patricia appeared on my porch, I was having dinner at an upscale restaurant in Greenwich when I saw her. She was with Gerald and another couple seated across the restaurant. We made eye contact briefly. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I nodded back. Then we both returned to our respective dinners. That tiny interaction, polite but distant, felt like the final closure on the whole saga. We'd both moved on. She'd faced consequences for her actions, hopefully learned from them and rebuilt her life elsewhere. I defended my rights, built a successful business and helped transform my neighborhood's governance. The lessons from that bizarre conflict stayed with me. Stand firm on matters of principle. Don't let bullies, even ones with official titles, push you around. Document everything. Get good legal counsel. And sometimes, the best response to someone demanding you share a resource is to make that resource completely unavailable to them through legal means. Diego retired from active property management at 60, after 12 successful years running Whitmore Estate Services. We promoted his son Miguel to managing director, bringing things full circle. Diego remained as a consultant and advisor, but mostly spent time with his grandchildren and traveling with his wife. At his retirement party, Diego gave a toast that brought the house down. I have to thank Patricia Carmichael, wherever she is, for being so unreasonable that she pushed Will into making me the best job offer of my life. Sometimes the worst people lead to the best outcomes. Cheers to crazy HOA presidents. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. It was funny because enough time had passed. The trauma and stress had faded, leaving only the absurdity and the unexpected positive outcomes. I sold my Meadowbrook property eventually, not because of any HOA issues, but because I'd purchased a larger estate in Litchfield County that made more sense as a primary residence. The Meadowbrook house sold for well above asking price to a family from Manhattan. The neighborhood's reputation had completely recovered from the Patricia years. My final interaction with the Meadowbrook HOA was a pleasant meeting with David Chen, who'd remained president for 8 years and genuinely earned the position through competent leadership. We had coffee, signed some transfer documents, and shook hands. You know, Will, you joining this neighborhood and standing up to Patricia was probably the best thing that could have happened to us, David said. She was heading toward even worse abuses. You forced the confrontation that exposed her behavior and led to real reform. Residents today have no idea how much better things are now. I was just defending my rights, but I'm glad it worked out for everyone. Well, good luck in Litchfield, and thanks for everything. Looking back on the entire saga, from that first ridiculous demand to share my snow removal contractor to the final sale of my property, the story felt almost unbelievable. An HOA president went from demanding I share a contractor to committing crimes to getting arrested to the whole neighborhood reforming its governance. But it had all happened, every absurd moment of it. And through it all, one truth remained constant. Nobody, not even an HOA president, has the right to control your private employment decisions or force you to share your resources. Standing up for that principle had been difficult, stressful, and time-consuming, but it had been absolutely worth it. Diego's truck, repaired and repainted after Patricia's vandalism, eventually retired to a garage at the Ridgefield property, a memento of the conflict that had changed both our lives. Sometimes Miguel would point it out to new employees and tell them the story of the HOA president who vandalized it over snow removal. "Remember," Miguel would tell them, "people can be crazy, but doing the right thing and standing your ground is always worth it." This truck represents that lesson. The truck represented more than that to me. It represented the importance of boundaries, the value of fair employment, and the eventual triumph of common sense over petty tyranny. It represented one man's refusal to be bullied by an overreaching HOA and another man's opportunity to build a better life. In the end, Patricia's demand that I share my snow removal guy had led to exactly the opposite outcome she'd wanted. Instead of Diego being available to service the HOA neighborhood, he became completely unavailable, dedicated exclusively to my properties. Instead of Patricia maintaining control, she lost everything: her position, her reputation, and her freedom temporarily. Meanwhile, Diego and I both thrived. He built a career and business beyond his dreams. I protected my rights and created a successful company that employed dozens of people and served clients across Connecticut. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success, prosperity, and moving forward while your adversary faces the natural consequences of their own poor choices. Patricia had tried to force me into compliance. Instead, she'd forced herself into irrelevance. The snow continued to fall in Connecticut every winter, blanketing the state in white. And every winter, my properties remained immaculately maintained by the estate management company that had been born from one HOA president's unreasonable demands and one property owner's principled refusal to comply. That's how a simple dispute over snow removal transformed into arrests, restraining orders, business creation, and neighborhood reform. That's how standing firm on principle, even when pressured by official authority, led to outcomes far better than anyone could have predicted. And that's how I hired my snow removal guy full-time rather than share him with an entitled HOA president, and never regretted that decision for a single moment.